Most people never realize the moment that changes their life already happened. Emily Carter didn't either, not until she saw the receipt. The restaurant lights glowed warm against polished marble floors, and the quiet clinking of silverware filled the air like soft rain. It was just another Tuesday night at Whitmore and Lane, one of Manhattan's most discreet luxury restaurants, where conversations stayed quiet and watches cost more than most people's cars. Emily moved between tables with calm efficiency, her black apron tied neatly, her blonde hair pulled into a simple low bun. She didn't rush. She never did. Even during peak hours, there was something measured about her movements, something steady that didn't quite belong in a place built on pressure and speed. Some of the newer servers whispered that she seemed too calm for the job. Others said she watched too much and spoke too little. Emily didn't mind. Silence had always felt safer than filling space with unnecessary words. At precisely 7:08 p.m., the front door opened, and the temperature of the room seemed to shift without anyone noticing why. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, his navy overcoat resting perfectly against his tailored suit, his presence quiet but unmistakable. He wasn't loud, and he never demanded attention, yet people instinctively adjusted themselves when he entered. The hostess greeted him softly, and he nodded once, already scanning the room with a calm, observant gaze that seemed to notice everything without lingering on anything. Emily was assigned to his table as usual. He came once every few weeks, always alone, always ordering the same thing. Grilled salmon, sparkling water, no dessert. He rarely spoke beyond polite necessities, and he never stayed longer than 45 minutes. Emily approached with her notepad, her expression composed. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, setting down a glass of water. His eyes lifted briefly, gray and unreadable, then he gave a slight nod. "Good evening." The interaction lasted less than 5 seconds, but Emily felt something unusual. Not tension, not discomfort, just the faint sense that he had noticed her the way one notices small details others miss. She took his order, delivered the meal, and stepped away, continuing her shift like any other night. At 7:42 p.m., Daniel Whitmore finished his dinner. He placed his napkin neatly beside the plate, checked his watch, and reached for the check presenter Emily had placed moments earlier. He opened it slowly, wrote something, and slid his card inside. When Emily returned, she collected it with a polite smile, unaware that her evening had already changed. She processed the payment, printed the receipt, and opened the folder again. The tip line read, $1. Emily blinked, surprised but not offended. She had seen worse. Wealth didn't always translate into generosity, and she had long stopped measuring people by numbers written on receipts. But then she noticed something else. Beneath the signature, written in clean, deliberate handwriting, was a second line. 8:47 p.m., don't leave yet. Emily frowned slightly. She glanced at the digital clock above the bar. 7:12 p.m. Her fingers paused against the paper. The words felt oddly deliberate, not rushed, not casual, just quiet, intentional. She looked toward the door, but Daniel Whitmore had already left. The receipt felt heavier than it should have, like a message meant for a moment that hadn't arrived yet. Emily folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, unsure why she didn't throw it away. Something about it felt wrong, or maybe important. The restaurant continued humming around her, unaware that time had just been written down before it happened. Emily Carter told herself she would throw the receipt away after her next table, but she did not. Instead, her fingers brushed against it every few minutes, as if confirming it was still there. The restaurant continued moving in its familiar rhythm, glasses clinking softly, muted conversations blending into a calm hum, and the faint scent of grilled salmon drifting through the air. At 7:29 p.m., Emily refilled water for a couple celebrating an anniversary, smiling politely as they discussed vacation plans in Napa Valley. At 7:36 p.m., she delivered a ribeye steak to a corporate table where 3 executives spoke quietly about quarterly numbers and market forecasts. Everything felt normal, almost too normal, yet the folded piece of paper in her apron pocket seemed to pull her attention back again and again. At 7:41 p.m., she glanced at the clock above the bar. The red digital numbers glowed softly against the dim lighting. 7:41. She exhaled slowly, unsure why she was paying attention. It was just a receipt. Just a strange note from a quiet billionaire who barely spoke. Still, she found herself calculating the minutes. At 7:44 p.m., her coworker Melissa approached with a small stack of menus. "You are almost done for the night, right?" Melissa asked, her voice low so guests would not overhear. Emily nodded gently. 10 more minutes. Melissa smiled. "Lucky. I still have 3 tables." Emily returned the smile, but her attention drifted again toward the clock. 7:45. The minutes felt slower now, stretching slightly, like the calm before something she could not quite name. At 7:46 p.m., the floor manager approached from behind. "Emily, can you help with table 12 before you head out? Their server is running late." Emily turned slightly, following his gesture toward the far corner near the staircase that led to the mezzanine level. It was not unusual. She often helped when shifts overlapped. She nodded. Of course. She began walking toward the service station, reaching for a tray. Her hand paused briefly as her fingers brushed the receipt again. 7:46. 1 minute left. She did not know why that mattered, but her steps slowed just slightly. She adjusted the glasses on the tray more carefully than necessary, aligning them until they sat perfectly balanced. A soft mechanical sound echoed faintly from above, barely noticeable beneath the restaurant's ambient music. Emily looked up instinctively toward the mezzanine. The chandelier lights shimmered gently, casting warm reflections across the polished surfaces. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, something in her chest tightened. 7:47. A sudden metallic clink sounded from above, followed by the soft slide of something shifting. Emily froze for a fraction of a second. Then a server from the mezzanine leaned over the railing, calling quietly to someone behind her. The moment passed quickly, but Emily instinctively stepped back from the area near the staircase. A few seconds later, a decorative tray slipped from a service card on the mezzanine and fell onto the carpeted landing below, the sound muffled but startling enough to draw several glances. No one was hurt. No glass shattered. Just a quiet disturbance that ended as quickly as it began. Emily exhaled slowly, her pulse slightly elevated despite the harmless outcome. She realized something quietly unsettling. If she had walked forward without pausing, she would have been standing exactly where the tray landed. The realization was subtle but unmistakable. She looked at the clock again. 7:47 p.m. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray she was holding. Melissa leaned over from behind. "The bar. You okay?" Emily nodded softly. "Yes, just surprised." Melissa shrugged lightly. "Stuff happens. That card has been loose all week." Emily did not respond immediately. She reached into her apron and unfolded the receipt again. 8:47 p.m. Do not leave yet. The time she had just watched pass was not the one written. That realization settled quietly, like a second layer of meaning forming beneath the first. She folded the paper again, slower this time. The restaurant returned to normal within seconds, conversations resuming, soft laughter filling the air again, but Emily felt a subtle shift inside herself. She finished assisting table 12, her movements calm as always, though her thoughts moved differently now. At 7:58 p.m., she cleared her final table. At 8:02 p.m., she wiped down the service station, her shift technically over. The manager glanced at her. "You can head out whenever you are ready." Emily nodded, but she did not move toward the locker room. Instead, she glanced once more at the clock. 8:02 p.m. 45 minutes until the time written on the receipt. She slipped the folded paper back into her apron pocket. For reasons she still could not explain, she quietly decided to stay. Emily Carter stayed near the service station, her shift technically over, but her attention anchored to the clock above the bar. 8:06 p.m. The restaurant had softened into its late evening rhythm, fewer guests, quieter conversations, the gentle hum of a piano track playing through hidden speakers. Most of the dinner rush had passed, leaving the space feeling calmer, almost reflective. Emily removed her apron and folded it neatly over her arm, though she did not head toward the locker room. Instead, she remained close to the hallway leading to the staff exit, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the red digits of the clock. 8:10 p.m. Melissa passed by carrying a tray of empty glasses and paused when she noticed Emily still standing there. "You are still here?" she asked, surprised. Emily nodded lightly. "Just waiting a few minutes." Melissa raised an eyebrow but did not press further. "Well, enjoy the quiet while it lasts." Tomorrow is going to be chaos with that private event. Emily gave a faint smile, then watched as Melissa disappeared behind the bar. 8:13 p.m. The front door opened briefly as a couple stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, the faint sound of traffic drifting in before the door closed again. Emily moved slowly toward the hostess stand, picking up a folded napkin left behind and placing it back neatly. Her movements were calm, deliberate, almost meditative. Still, beneath the calm, she felt a quiet awareness building, as if time itself had become something she was watching rather than simply living. 8:17 p.m. The manager approached, checking the final reservations on his tablet. He glanced at Emily. "You sure you are off the clock?" he asked gently. Emily nodded. "Yes." He smiled. "You can head out. We are good tonight." Emily hesitated for a second, then replied softly, "I might stay just a little longer." The manager shrugged lightly. "Your call." He turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving Emily alone again with the quiet ticking of seconds. 8:21 p.m. A server on the mezzanine adjusted a rolling cart, the wheels squeaking faintly as it moved across the polished floor above. Emily glanced upward instinctively, her mind replaying the earlier moment at 7:47. Nothing unusual happened. The cart rolled smoothly, and the server disappeared into the service hallway. Emily exhaled quietly. 8:26 p.m. She stepped toward the window near the entrance, looking out at the city lights reflecting off damp pavement. A yellow cab passed slowly, headlights gliding across the glass. For a moment, she wondered if she was overthinking everything, if the note meant nothing at all. Just a strange coincidence. Just a quiet billionaire writing something unusual. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the receipt again. The handwriting remained clean and steady, unchanged, as if the moment had been waiting patiently for her to arrive. 8:47 p.m. Do not leave yet. Emily folded the paper carefully once more. 8:31 p.m. The kitchen door swung open briefly, releasing the scent of roasted vegetables and warm bread. A dishwasher laughed quietly at something someone said, the sound fading quickly as the door closed again. The restaurant felt peaceful now, the kind of calm that came after a long day when everyone slowed down without realizing it. 8:35 p.m. Emily walked slowly toward the hallway leading to the staff exit, then stopped just short of the door. She leaned lightly against the wall, her eyes lifting toward the clock again. 8:37 p.m. A faint vibration traveled through the floor as the building elevator moved somewhere above. Emily barely noticed, her thoughts drifting between curiosity and quiet anticipation. 8:40 p.m. Melissa returned, tying her own apron looser now that the rush had ended. "You really are staying late," she said with a small laugh. Emily nodded. "Just a few more minutes." Melissa shook her head playfully. "You are the calmest person I know. Most people would be halfway home by now." Emily smiled gently, but did not respond. 8:43 p.m. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as part of the automatic evening setting, softening the atmosphere even further. Shadows stretched across the marble floor, and the reflections from the chandeliers shimmered gently. 8:45 p.m. Emily's breathing slowed, steady and quiet. The seconds felt clearer now, each one noticeable. 8:46 p.m. She glanced once more toward the staff exit, then back to the clock. 8:47 p.m. arrived quietly, without announcement, without warning. For a moment, nothing happened at all. The restaurant remained calm, conversations low, music soft. Then, from the far end near the entrance, a guest suddenly paused, adjusting her heel after stepping onto a slightly damp section of polished floor left behind by a recently cleaned table. A server nearby moved quickly to place a caution sign, but the small distraction caused a ripple of movement as another staff member adjusted a heavy decorative stand positioned near the entrance to create more space. The stand shifted slightly, its base rolling an inch farther than expected before settling again. Emily watched the moment unfold, her eyes widening slightly. Just seconds earlier, she had been about to walk toward that same exit. If she had left at 8:45, she would have stepped directly into the narrow space where the stand had shifted. It was a subtle change, harmless, barely noticeable to anyone else, but Emily felt the quiet significance settle over her like a gentle realization. She looked down at the folded receipt in her hand. The time had passed, and she was still there. Emily Carter remained still for a moment after the clock turned to 8:47, her fingers resting lightly against the folded receipt as the restaurant slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. The guest near the entrance thanked the server for placing the caution sign, and the decorative stand was carefully repositioned, its polished brass surface reflecting the soft chandelier lights again. The moment had passed almost invisibly, like a ripple that disappeared before anyone realized it existed. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, but her thoughts did not settle as easily. She looked again at the clock. 8:48 p.m. The time written on the receipt was now behind her. Yet the feeling did not disappear. Instead, it shifted into something quieter, deeper, like a question that had not fully answered itself. She slipped the receipt back into her apron pocket, though she was no longer wearing the apron. The folded paper remained in her hand instead, her fingers tracing the clean handwriting once more. 8:50 p.m. Melissa approached again, tying her hair into a loose ponytail as she finished clearing her last table. "You are still here?" she asked softly, though her tone carried mild amusement rather than surprise now. Emily nodded. "Just finishing up." Melissa glanced toward the clock. "You stayed almost an extra hour." Emily gave a faint smile. It felt quieter than going home right away. Melissa shrugged gently. "I get that. Some nights feel different." She gathered her things and waved lightly before heading toward the locker room. Emily watched her go, then turned toward the front windows again. Outside, Manhattan moved with its usual calm energy, headlights gliding along damp pavement, distant sirens echoing softly in the background. Nothing about the city suggested anything unusual had happened. Yet Emily felt something had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. 8:53 p.m. The front door opened again, letting in a brief gust of cool evening air. Emily turned instinctively, expecting a late guest or someone picking up a forgotten item. Instead, she saw a familiar navy overcoat step quietly back inside. Daniel Whitmore paused just inside the entrance, his gaze sweeping the room once, calm and observant as before. His eyes settled on Emily almost immediately, as if he had expected her to still be there. He walked forward at an unhurried pace, hands relaxed at his sides, the soft sound of his shoes barely noticeable against the marble floor. Emily felt her breath slow, not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty that this moment had been part of something she did not yet understand. He stopped, a few feet away, his expression neutral but attentive. "You stayed," he said softly. Emily held the folded receipt in her hand, her fingers tightening slightly around the paper. "Yes," she replied calmly. Daniel glanced briefly toward the clock above the bar, now reading 8:55 p.m., then back at her. A faint nod followed, almost imperceptible. "Good." The word was simple, but the tone carried quiet confirmation rather than casual approval. Emily studied him for a moment, her calm demeanor unchanged, though curiosity now moved beneath the surface. "You wrote that time," she said gently, lifting the receipt slightly. 8:47. Daniel's gaze dropped briefly to the paper, then returned to her eyes. "I did." Emily tilted her head slightly. "How did you know I would still be here?" Daniel's expression softened just a fraction, not quite a smile, but something close to it. "I did not know," he replied. "I hoped you would notice." Emily considered that quietly. The answer did not fully explain anything, yet it felt deliberate, measured. Daniel glanced toward the entrance again, then back at Emily. "Sometimes small details matter," he said, his voice calm and even. "Most people leave without noticing them." Emily lowered her gaze briefly to the receipt again. The words felt heavier now, no longer just a strange message, but something intentional. She looked back up. "And if I had left earlier?" Daniel paused for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "Then nothing would have happened," he said quietly. "But you stayed." The simplicity of the statement settled between them. Emily realized that whatever had just occurred was not about predicting events or controlling outcomes. It was about awareness, about noticing small things others ignored. Daniel gave a small nod, then stepped back slightly. "Have a good evening, Miss Carter." Emily blinked faintly. She had never told him her last name. Before she could respond, he turned toward the door again, his movements as calm and quiet as when he first entered. The door opened softly, and he stepped back into the Manhattan night. Emily remained where she stood, the folded receipt still in her hand, her thoughts quiet but shifting. For the first time that evening, she realized something else had changed. It was not just that he had written a time. It was that he had trusted she would understand it. Emily Carter stood quietly for a few seconds after Daniel Whitmore stepped back into the night, the soft closing of the glass door leaving a gentle echo in the otherwise calm restaurant. The folded receipt remained in her hand, its edges slightly warm from her fingers. 8:58 p.m. The clock above the bar glowed steadily, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Emily exhaled slowly, her thoughts moving carefully through the conversation. He had not predicted anything. He had simply noticed. And more importantly, he had trusted that she might notice too. That realization felt unfamiliar but grounding at the same time. Emily slipped the receipt into the pocket of her coat this time, not her apron, as if the paper had shifted from something temporary to something personal. She walked toward the locker room, her footsteps quiet against the marble floor. The staff area was nearly empty now, with only a faint hum from the refrigerator units and the soft rustling of someone folding uniforms in the corner. Emily hung her apron neatly on its hook, then reached for her light gray coat. She paused briefly, her hand resting on the fabric, her mind replaying Daniel's final words. Sometimes small details matter. Most people leave without noticing them. Emily buttoned her coat slowly, then picked up her bag. 9:03 p.m. When she stepped back into the dining room, the restaurant had grown even quieter, the final tables finishing dessert, the piano track shifting into a softer melody. The night felt settled now, as if the city outside had slowed just enough to notice itself. Emily walked toward the exit again, this time without hesitation. As she reached the front, she noticed something else resting on the host's stand. A small leather card holder, dark brown, understated, almost easy to miss. She stopped, her eyes narrowing slightly. The hostess had already left for the evening, and the item had not been there earlier. Emily glanced toward the dining room, then gently picked up the card holder. It felt heavier than expected. She opened it carefully. Inside was a simple business card, clean white with minimal text. Daniel Whitmore. Beneath his name, a private number. No company logo. No title. Just his name. Emily studied the card quietly. There was no note, no explanation, nothing else written. Just the card, placed deliberately where she would notice it. Emily closed the holder slowly, her expression calm but thoughtful. She understood the gesture immediately. It was not an invitation. It was not pressure. It was simply a door, left open without expectation. She placed the card carefully inside her bag, then stepped outside into the cool Manhattan air. The city lights stretched along the avenue, reflections shimmering across damp sidewalks, distant traffic moving in a steady rhythm. Emily pulled her coat slightly tighter, then began walking toward the subway entrance 2 blocks away. Her pace was calm, measured, the same quiet rhythm she carried inside the restaurant. As she reached the corner, she paused briefly at the crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. A group of office workers passed beside her, their conversations blending into the night air. Emily glanced upward toward the buildings, their windows glowing like scattered constellations. The evening felt ordinary again, yet her thoughts had shifted. She reached into her coat pocket and unfolded the receipt one more time beneath the streetlight. 8:47 p.m. Do not leave yet. She looked at the time on her phone. 9:12 p.m. The moment had already passed, but its meaning lingered quietly. Emily folded the receipt carefully and slipped it back into her pocket. The crosswalk's signal changed, and she stepped forward, blending into the steady flow of the city. Somewhere behind her, the restaurant lights dimmed further as closing time approached. But Emily carried something with her now, not urgency, not confusion, but awareness. The kind that made small details feel different. The kind that made time feel less like something that passed, and more like something that waited to be noticed. Emily Carter descended the subway steps at 9:15 p.m., the sound of distant trains echoing through the tiled corridor as warm air rose from below. The city above remained bright and restless, but underground everything felt quieter, more contained, like time slowed slightly between stops. She walked toward the downtown platform, her shoes tapping softly against the concrete, her mind still replaying the evening in small fragments. The receipt, the time, the way Daniel Whitmore had returned without surprise. and the card now resting in her bag. She did not reach for it again. Not yet. Instead, she stood near the yellow safety line, watching the tunnel stretch into shadow. A train arrived within a minute, its headlights cutting softly through the dim platform. Emily stepped inside, finding an empty seat near the window. The doors closed with a gentle chime, and the train began to move. The motion felt steady, predictable, almost comforting. Emily leaned back slightly, her reflection faint in the dark glass. Across from her, a man in a navy suit read quietly from his phone. Two teenagers whispered about weekend plans. A woman near the door adjusted her scarf and stared at the floor. Ordinary moments. Small details. Emily noticed them all without effort. She realized something else had shifted. She had always been observant, but tonight, she was aware of that awareness itself. The train slowed at the next stop, then continued again. Emily reached into her bag and finally pulled out the small leather holder. She opened it carefully and looked at the card again. Daniel Whitmore. The simplicity of it still struck her. No title, no company, just a name and a number. It felt deliberate, quiet. She slid the card back into the holder, then returned it to her bag as the train approached her stop. 10 minutes later, Emily stepped onto the sidewalk near her apartment building, a modest brownstone on a quieter street lined with small trees and soft streetlights. The air felt cooler now, the city sounds more distant. She walked the half block to the entrance, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. Emily climbed the stairs to the second floor, her pace slow, thoughtful. Inside her apartment, everything looked exactly as she had left it that morning. A small kitchen, a narrow couch, a bookshelf lined with worn paperbacks, and a single framed photograph of her parents. Emily placed her bag on the table, removed her coat, and set it carefully on the chair. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around her, gentle and familiar. She walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and leaned lightly against the counter. Her mind replayed the moment at 8:47 again. The subtle shift of the decorative stand, the quiet ripple that no one else seemed to notice. She realized it was not about danger. It was about timing, about presence. Emily carried the glass to the small table near the window and sat down. Outside, the streetlights cast soft reflections across parked cars, their surfaces gleaming faintly. She reached into her coat pocket and unfolded the receipt once more, placing it flat on the table. The ink looked calm, steady, unhurried. 8:47 p.m. Do not leave yet. Emily studied it quietly, then glanced at the clock on her wall. 9:32 p.m. The moment had passed, but the message remained. She leaned back slightly, her thoughts drifting. Daniel Whitmore had noticed something small. A loose cart, a damp floor, the subtle patterns of movement in a restaurant. He had written a time not to control anything, but to invite awareness. Emily folded the receipt carefully and placed it beside the leather holder. The two objects sat quietly together, simple and unassuming. After a few minutes, Emily stood and turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the soft glow from the window. She moved toward the bookshelf, her fingers brushing along the spines of her books, then paused when she noticed something else. Her planner, left open from earlier that morning, rested on the corner of the shelf. She had written her schedule for the week, small neat handwriting marking each shift. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. Whitmore and Lane. Emily stared at the entry for a moment, then gently closed the planner. She realized she would see him again, not because he had asked, not because she had called, but because sometimes small details had a way of returning quietly, just like the time written on a receipt. Emily turned toward the window once more, the city lights steady and distant, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself a faint, thoughtful smile. The next evening arrived with the same quiet rhythm, but Emily Carter noticed the difference immediately. She arrived 10 minutes early, something she rarely did, stepping into Whitmore and Lane at 4:50 p.m. as the staff prepared for the dinner rush. The chandeliers had not yet reached their full glow, and the dining room felt softer, almost unfinished, like a stage before the performance began. Emily tied her apron slowly, her movements calm as always, but her attention sharpened to the smallest details. A chair slightly misaligned near table 6. A faint reflection on the polished floor near the entrance. The quiet hum of the cooling system above. She noticed everything. Melissa glanced over from the bar, smiling lightly. You are early today. Emily nodded. I wanted a quiet start. Melissa laughed softly. You always say that. Emily returned a faint smile, then moved toward the service station, aligning silverware with deliberate precision. 5:12 p.m. The first guests arrived, and the restaurant gradually filled with conversation and soft music. Emily moved between tables with her usual calm presence, her mind balanced between routine and awareness. 5:38 p.m. A server on the mezzanine adjusted a decorative candle stand, and Emily noticed the slight tilt before it was corrected. 5:52 p.m. A guest dropped a napkin, and Emily caught the movement before it reached the floor, handing it back with a quiet smile. Small details, quiet moments. The evening unfolded gently. 6:05 p.m. The front door opened, and Emily felt the same subtle shift she had noticed the night before. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside, his navy suit replaced with charcoal gray this time, his presence calm and understated. The hostess greeted him softly, and he nodded, his eyes briefly scanning the room. For a fraction of a second, his gaze paused on Emily. Not surprised, just acknowledging. Emily approached his table moments later, her posture composed. Good evening, Mr. Whitmore, she said gently, setting down his glass of water. He looked up, his expression calm, thoughtful. Good evening, Miss Carter. The way he said her name carried quiet familiarity, not intrusion. Emily nodded slightly, then took his order, the same as before. Grilled salmon, sparkling water, no dessert. As she stepped away, she felt his attention linger not on her, but on the environment itself, the same observant stillness she had begun to understand. 6:20 p.m. Emily delivered his meal, and he thanked her quietly. No extra conversation, no unnecessary words. Yet the silence between them felt different now, less distant, more aware. 6:37 p.m. Emily passed his table again, refilling his water before he asked. Daniel glanced at the glass, then at her, a faint nod acknowledging the timing. 6:48 p.m. The restaurant grew busier, voices rising slightly, glasses clinking more frequently. Emily continued her shift, but her awareness remained steady, like a quiet thread running beneath everything. 6:59 p.m. Daniel finished his meal. He placed his napkin beside his plate, the same deliberate motion as before. Emily brought the check presenter, placing it gently on the table. He opened it, wrote something, and closed it again without hurry. Emily collected it minutes later, her expression neutral as always. At the service station, she processed the payment and opened the folder. The tip this time read $20. Not large, not small, just deliberate. But beneath the signature, there was another line. 7:23 p.m. Look at the window. Emily felt her breath slow slightly. She glanced at the clock above the bar. 7:04 p.m. The time had not yet arrived. She folded the receipt quietly, slipping it into her apron pocket. The restaurant continued moving around her, unaware of the quiet message resting against her hand. 7:15 p.m. Emily cleared a nearby table, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the large front windows. Outside, the sky had shifted to deep blue, the streetlights glowing softly against the early evening. 7:21 p.m. Emily stood near the entrance, adjusting a menu display. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. 7:23 p.m. arrived quietly. Emily lifted her gaze toward the window. At that exact moment, a sudden breeze pushed a loose flyer from the bulletin board outside, sending it drifting downward. A guest approaching the door paused, bending slightly to catch it before it slid underfoot. The movement caused another guest to step aside gently, avoiding a small collision that might have disrupted the entrance flow. The moment passed softly, unnoticed by most. Emily watched the reflection in the glass, the small chain of movements unfolding with quiet precision. She understood. It was never about predicting the future. It was about noticing patterns. She folded the receipt again, her calm returning, though her understanding deepened. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore lifted his glass slightly, his eyes meeting hers for just a second. No words, just recognition. Emily Carter lowered her gaze after the brief moment of recognition, her movements returning to the steady rhythm of service, but her awareness remained heightened, like a quiet thread running beneath every second. 7:25 p.m. The restaurant hummed gently, guests conversing softly, silverware reflecting the warm glow of chandelier lights. Emily moved toward table 9, refilling glasses before they emptied, noticing the subtle cues of movement before requests were spoken. She realized she was beginning to anticipate small shifts without thinking. 7:31 p.m. A faint vibration moved through the floor as the front door opened again, and a group of 3 business guests entered, their voices low but purposeful. The hostess guided them to a table near the center, and Emily noticed Daniel Whitmore glance briefly toward them before returning his attention to his water glass. It was subtle but deliberate. 7:38 p.m. Emily passed his table, collecting an empty plate. As she turned, she noticed Daniel gently reposition his napkin slightly closer to the edge of the table. A small gesture, almost meaningless, but Emily understood. She slowed her step and looked toward the far side of the dining room, where a server carried a tray of wine glasses. The path between the tables narrowed as the business guests adjusted their chairs. Emily stepped forward quietly and shifted a nearby chair by an inch, creating more space without drawing attention. Seconds later, the server passed smoothly through the gap, unaware of the adjustment. Emily continued walking, her expression calm, her awareness settling deeper. 7:46 p.m. Daniel finished his sparkling water and placed the glass slightly forward. Emily arrived moments later, refilling it without being asked. He gave a faint nod, not as gratitude, but as acknowledgement of shared understanding. 7:52 p.m. The restaurant lights softened slightly as evening progressed, reflections stretching gently across the polished floor. Emily moved near the entrance, straightening menus again, her eyes occasionally drifting toward Daniel's table. 8:01 p.m. Daniel requested the check quietly. Emily brought the presenter and placed it before him. He opened it, wrote something again, and closed it without hurry. Emily collected it a few minutes later and walked toward the service station. Her fingers opened the folder carefully. The tip read $30. Beneath the signature, another line appeared. 8:12 p.m. Watch the hallway. Emily glanced toward the clock. 8:03 p.m. She folded the receipt slowly and slipped it into her apron pocket, her breathing steady. 8:10 p.m. Emily moved toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, carrying a tray of folded napkins. The corridor felt quieter than the main dining room, the lighting softer, footsteps muted by carpet. 8:12 p.m. arrived quietly. A guest stepped from the restroom, adjusting her purse strap as she walked. At the same moment, a staff member pushed a small utility cart from the service door. Emily noticed the alignment instantly. She slowed her pace and gently guided the guest forward with a polite gesture, creating space. The cart rolled smoothly past without interruption. The moment lasted only seconds, unnoticed by both guest and staff. Emily exhaled softly, the pattern becoming clearer now. Awareness, timing, quiet adjustments. She returned to the dining room, her calm deepening. Daniel Whitmore sat quietly, finishing his water, his gaze briefly meeting hers again. 8:15 p.m. He stood, placing the check presenter neatly on the table, and adjusted his jacket. Emily approached. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," she said gently. He nodded. "Good evening, Miss Carter." His tone remained calm, but something in his expression softened slightly, as if he had seen enough to confirm what he suspected. He walked toward the exit, his steps quiet, his presence fading into the evening once again. Emily watched the door close softly behind him, her fingers brushing the folded receipt in her pocket. She realized something else now. He was not guiding her. He was teaching her to notice. And she was learning. Emily Carter watched the glass door close behind Daniel Whitmore, the faint reflection of the streetlights settling again across the polished floor. 8:16 p.m. The restaurant continued as usual, conversation soft, music gentle, yet something inside her had shifted from curiosity into quiet certainty. She no longer waited for the next moment. She simply noticed. 8:21 p.m. Emily cleared a table near the entrance, aligning the chairs with her usual precision. A family rose to leave, their child lingering slightly near the doorway. Emily noticed the damp mark left by a recently wiped surface near the threshold. She stepped forward calmly and adjusted the caution sign an inch closer, her motion subtle and natural. Seconds later, the child passed through safely, unaware of the quiet adjustment. Emily returned to her routine, her expression unchanged, but her awareness sharper. 8:29 p.m. Melissa approached, stacking folded napkins. You seem different tonight, she said softly. Emily tilted her head slightly. Different? Melissa nodded. Calmer. Like you already know what is going to happen. Emily gave a faint smile. I am just noticing more. Melissa laughed gently. Well, it is working. Everything is smoother tonight. She walked away, leaving Emily with the quiet hum of the room. 8:34 p.m. Emily passed the front windows again, glancing briefly outside. The evening air stirred the leaves of the small trees along the sidewalk, their shadows shifting gently under the streetlights. She realized she was not searching for anything specific anymore. She was simply present. 8:41 p.m. The manager asked Emily to assist with a large table near the center. She moved quickly but calmly, placing glasses before guests asked, noticing small movements before they formed requests. 8:47 p.m. approached again, and Emily felt the memory of the previous night, but she did not pause this time. She continued naturally, adjusting a chair, guiding a server through a narrow path, keeping the flow steady without drawing attention. 8:47 p.m. passed quietly, like any other minute. Emily realized that awareness no longer needed a signal. It had become instinct. 9:02 p.m. The dinner rush faded, and the restaurant softened into late evening calm. Emily moved toward the service station, wiping the counter slowly, her mind steady. As she finished, the hostess approached with a small envelope. This was left earlier, she said, handing it to Emily. Emily looked at the plain white envelope, her name written in careful handwriting. She opened it gently. Inside was a single folded card. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was familiar. Not a time this time. Just a sentence. You noticed. Emily stood quietly, the words settling into her thoughts. Beneath the sentence, a final line appeared. Most people wait for change. A few learn to see it. Emily folded the card carefully, her expression calm but thoughtful. She slipped it into her pocket beside the earlier receipts, the quiet collection now forming a small story of its own. 9:12 p.m. Emily finished her shift and removed her apron, hanging it neatly in the staff room. When she stepped back into the dining room, the lights had dimmed slightly, the final tables preparing to leave. She walked toward the exit, her steps steady, unhurried. Outside, Manhattan moved as always, traffic lights changing, footsteps echoing softly along the sidewalk. Emily paused briefly under the glow of a streetlight, her hand resting lightly against her coat pocket where the folded cards rested. She realized something important. Daniel Whitmore had not changed her evening. He had changed how she saw every evening after. Emily stepped forward, blending into the quiet rhythm of the city, her pace calm, her awareness steady. Behind her, the restaurant lights softened further, the night settling gently around the building. Emily continued walking, noticing the reflection of headlights, the distant hum of the subway below, the quiet movement of people passing by. Small details, quiet moments. And for the first time, she understood that the most important changes rarely arrived loudly. They arrived quietly, written in small moments, waiting for someone calm enough to notice them.